The evening sky glowed with golden light as expensive cars lined up outside a grand mansion. Inside, laughter filled the air, and soft music floated through the hall. Crystal lights sparkled, tables were covered in shining dishes, and every guest looked like they belonged to a different world, one of comfort and wealth. The rich businessman who owned the mansion was hosting a big party to celebrate a new deal he had closed. Everything had to look perfect. Among the staff working that evening was a maid named Rena. She moved quietly through the crowd, holding a silver tray filled with glasses of juice and snacks. She wasn't used to such fancy gatherings, but she knew how to do her job well. Her steps were careful, her eyes stayed low, and she always made sure guests got what they wanted before they even had to ask. For her, this was just another long evening of hard work. Rena lived a simple life. She came from a small neighborhood where dreams were often replaced by responsibilities. Her family wasn't wealthy. She had taken this job to help her younger brother go to school. Every morning she woke up before sunrise, cleaned the house, and came to the mansion to work. She never complained, even when her feet ached or when guests ignored her like she didn't exist. She was used to being invisible in rooms filled with glitter and glamour. That night she was moving across the hall when the rich man himself noticed her. He was standing with a group of his business friends, laughing loudly, his voice echoing over the music. Rena walked past them to serve drinks. She didn't expect to be noticed, but suddenly, the man's eyes followed her. He looked at her from head to toe, his expression turning amused. He leaned closer to his friends and said something that made them laugh. Rena didn't catch his words, but she felt their eyes on her. When she turned slightly, she heard it clearly this time, words that cut deep into her heart. "Look at her," he said, smirking. "I hope the trays are strong enough to handle her weight." The group burst into laughter. Some people even turned their heads to see who he was talking about. In that moment, the cheerful sound of music faded away for Rena. Her hands trembled as she held the tray tightly, trying not to drop it. Her face burned with embarrassment. She wanted to disappear, to vanish before anyone else looked at her. But she didn't say a word. She quietly placed the tray on a nearby table, forced a small smile, and walked away. Inside, her heart felt heavy. Every step she took felt harder than the last. She could still hear the sound of their laughter echoing behind her. In the kitchen, she leaned against the counter, trying to catch her breath. Her friend, another maid, noticed her pale face and asked if she was okay. Rena just nodded and whispered, "I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. Her eyes stung, and for a second she thought she might cry. Then she took a deep breath and forced herself to go back out, pretending nothing had happened. Hours passed. The guests danced, the drinks kept flowing, and everyone seemed to enjoy the night. But Rena's heart wasn't in her work anymore. Every time she saw the rich man laughing, her chest tightened. She couldn't understand why people found joy in mocking others. All she had ever done was work hard and stay humble. She never wanted attention, yet the moment she got it, it came in the cruelest way. When the party finally ended, the guests began to leave. The once lively hall now stood quiet, filled with half-eaten food and empty glasses. Rena stayed behind, cleaning the mess like she always did. Her body was tired, but her mind was even more exhausted. She gathered plates, wiped tables, and picked up trash left behind by people who didn't care who cleaned after them. She looked around at the decorations, the shining chandeliers, the marble floors. Everything looked perfect again, except for her heart. The laughter she heard earlier replayed in her head like a bad song she couldn't turn off. After finishing her duties, she walked back to her small room behind the mansion. It wasn't much, just a narrow space with a single bed, a cracked mirror, and a tiny window. She sat down, kicked off her shoes, and stared at the floor for a long moment. The sound of the night crickets filled the silence. She slowly looked at herself in the mirror. Her reflection looked tired, with traces of tears she didn't let fall. "Why?" she whispered softly.
"Why do people have to laugh at others like that?"
Her voice trembled as she said it. She remembered her younger days when life was simple, when she used to dance at local festivals. She had loved dancing, not because she wanted fame, but because it made her feel free. Her mother used to clap for her, saying, "You dance like your heart is telling a story." But after her mother's passing, Rena stopped dancing. Life became about survival. Dreams didn't pay the rent or buy groceries. Now, sitting in that tiny room, she thought about that part of herself she had buried long ago. She smiled faintly at the memory of spinning barefoot on the mud floor of her old home, her laughter mixing with the wind. She hadn't danced in years. The rich man's insult brought back all the pain she thought she had forgotten. The pain of feeling not enough, not beautiful, not worthy. She turned off the light and lay on her bed. But she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard those cruel words again. Strong enough to handle her weight. Her chest tightened and she rolled over, trying to push the thoughts away. But then another voice whispered inside her, soft but powerful. Maybe he laughed because he doesn't know your story. It was true. He didn't know the long hours she worked, the sacrifices she made, or the dreams she gave up. He didn't know the weight she carried wasn't just in her body. It was in her heart, in her responsibilities, in everything she had endured to survive. The next morning, she woke up before dawn as usual. The world outside was still dark. She washed her face, tied her hair, and put on her uniform. Life didn't stop for pain. She had to keep going. As she prepared the breakfast table in the mansion, she tried to push the memory of last night away. But deep inside, something had changed in her. There was a quiet determination forming, a small spark that refused to die. As she moved through the empty hall, she passed by the large ballroom where the party had taken place. The floor was clean now, shining under the soft morning light. She stopped for a moment and looked at her reflection in the polished tiles. The silence of the room wrapped around her, and for some reason she felt a strange pull. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then closed her eyes and took a slow breath. Her body remembered what her mind had forgotten. The rhythm, the movement, the joy. Without music, without an audience, she took a small step, then another. Her arms moved softly and she began to dance, just a little, just for herself. It wasn't perfect. Her body felt stiff, her steps uncertain. But as she moved, she felt something break inside her. Not pain, but release. She wasn't dancing to impress anyone. She was dancing to feel human again. When she stopped, she stood still for a long moment. Her heart was beating fast, but a smile touched her lips. She whispered to herself, "Maybe one day I'll show them what I can really do." Then she laughed quietly at the thought. It sounded silly. A maid dreaming of dancing again in a mansion where people only saw her as help. But deep down she knew this small act had already changed something. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel broken. She felt strong. She left the ballroom and went back to her duties, carrying that quiet strength with her. No one knew what had just happened. No one saw the spark return to her eyes. But soon the same place that had witnessed her humiliation would also witness her rise. And though she didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of her journey. A journey that would soon turn the laughter of mockery into applause filled with respect and tears. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and gold. The mansion was quiet except for the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway. Rena moved carefully through the house, cleaning and setting things in order before anyone else woke up. It had been 2 days since that awful party, but the memory of that night was still fresh in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she could hear the rich man's laughter echoing in her ears. She tried to forget it, but some words have a way of staying with you. They don't just hurt your ears, they hurt your heart. That morning, as she dusted the large mirror in the ballroom, she caught her reflection again. For a moment, she just looked at herself. She wasn't dressed in fine clothes. Her hands were rough from work and her face looked tired. Yet behind those tired eyes, there was something more, something she hadn't seen in a long time. It was a faint spark, like a small light that refused to go out. She remembered how she used to love dancing when she was younger. Before life became about survival, before work and bills, there was dance. As a little girl, she would dance barefoot on the dirt floor of her old home, spinning around while her mother clapped and laughed. Her mother used to tell her, "You dance with your heart, not your feet." Those words had always stayed with her. But as time passed, life took over. Her mother got sick, money ran short, and dreams had to be pushed aside. After her mother passed away, Rena stopped dancing. It felt wrong to do something that made her happy when her world was filled with sadness. Then came work, responsibilities, and endless days of labor. But no matter how many years passed, whenever she heard music, even for a few seconds, her heart would beat a little faster. That day, while cleaning, she overheard the mansion's event manager speaking to someone on the phone. His voice carried through the hall as he walked past her. Yes, we're organizing a charity event next month, he said. We'll need a dance performance. Something graceful, something that will touch people's hearts. Those words made Rena stop. A dance performance? For a moment, she just stood there, holding the duster in her hand. Her heart began to race. She listened closely as the manager continued. We'll have auditions soon. I just hope we can find someone good enough to perform at the mansion. Rena's mind began to spin. The thought of dancing again scared her, but it also excited her. It was like a part of her that had been asleep suddenly woke up. She whispered softly to herself, "Could I
Dance again?
But then she laughed quietly, shaking her head. No, that's impossible. Who would take me seriously? Still, the idea refused to leave her mind. All day long she kept thinking about it. Even when she was washing dishes, her fingers tapped lightly to a rhythm only she could hear. It was as if her body was reminding her of something she had forgotten, that music still lived inside her. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, she sat alone in her small room. The only light came from her old phone screen. She searched for songs she used to love years ago. The moment the music started playing, she felt something shift inside her. It was soft at first, a gentle memory like a breeze brushing against her soul. Then she stood up and faced the mirror again. Her room was tiny, but that didn't matter. There was enough space for her heart to move. Slowly she took a step forward, then another. Her body was stiff at first. It had been years since she last danced. But as the song continued, her body began to remember. Her arms flowed with the melody. Her feet followed the rhythm. Every move felt like she was letting go of all the pain she had kept hidden. In that small room with no audience and no stage, she danced like she used to as a child. For those few minutes, she wasn't a maid. She wasn't the woman people laughed at. She was just herself, free, strong, and full of life. When the music ended, she stood still, breathing hard. A tear rolled down her cheek, but this time it wasn't from sadness. It was from relief. She sat down on her bed, smiling softly to herself. I still have it, she whispered. I thought it was gone, but it's still there. From that night onward, dancing became her secret. Every evening after finishing her work, she would sneak into the old storage room near the back of the mansion. It was dusty and quiet, but it was her space. She would play music on her phone, close her eyes, and let her heart lead. Some nights she imagined performing on a stage with lights shining down on her. Other nights she imagined her mother sitting in the front row, clapping proudly like she used to. But most of all, she imagined proving to herself that she was more than what others saw, that her worth didn't depend on how she looked or how much she weighed. One evening, while she was practicing alone, the mansion's cook passed by and saw her through the half-open door. He didn't say anything, just stood there watching for a few seconds, amazed. The next morning, when he saw her in the kitchen, he smiled and said quietly, "You're really good. You dance like you've got something to say." Rena blushed and laughed softly. "I'm just practicing for myself," she said. But inside, those words meant a lot. For the first time in a long time, someone had seen her not as a maid, but as a person with talent, with soul. As the charity event drew closer, she kept practicing. She didn't know if she would ever get the chance to perform, but that didn't matter. The act of dancing itself gave her strength. It was her way of healing, of fighting back against the voice that once humiliated her. One afternoon, while polishing the ballroom floor, she overheard the event manager again. He sounded frustrated. "The dancer we hired might not be able to make it," he said. "If she cancels, we'll have to find someone else quickly." Rena froze where she stood. Her heart began to beat faster. Was this the chance she had been waiting for? She wanted to speak up, to tell him she could dance, but fear held her back. What if they laughed at her again? What if the rich man mocked her like before? That evening, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She sat on her bed, her mind full of questions. What if I fail? What if I make a fool of myself? She whispered, but another voice inside her replied softly, "What if you don't?" She thought about the laughter that had once hurt her so deeply. Then she thought about how it had pushed her to dance again. Sometimes pain becomes the reason we rise. Maybe this was her chance to turn that laughter into applause. She stood up, turned on her phone, and played the same song she had been practicing for weeks. She danced again, this time with more power, more emotion. Every step she took felt like a promise to herself, that no matter what others said, she would never let their words define her again. By the time the song ended, She was sweating and out of breath, but she smiled. She looked into the mirror and whispered, "One day they will see me for who I really am." That night, she went to bed with a peaceful heart. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she was ready for it. Her dream, which she thought had died long ago, was alive again, and somewhere in the same mansion, the ballroom stood quiet, waiting. The same place that had once echoed with cruel laughter would soon witness something completely different. Rena didn't know it yet, but fate was already preparing the stage for her. Her story was about to change forever, and the world that once looked down on her was soon going to rise to its feet, clapping for the very woman they once laughed at. Because sometimes, the most powerful dance begins from the deepest wound, and hers was only getting started. Days passed quickly, and soon the mansion was filled with new energy. The rich man was preparing for another grand event, a charity gala that was expected to draw even more attention than the last party. This time, it wasn't just about money or business. Important guests, city officials, and media representatives were all invited. Everything had to be perfect. The staff worked day and night. Decorations were being hung, tables were polished, and the sound team tested the speakers again and again. In the middle of all this, Rena quietly did her duties as usual. But deep inside her, something was different. There was a quiet fire in her heart, a purpose that no one else could see. For weeks, she had been secretly practicing her dance every night. It had become her way of healing, her way of proving to herself that she was more than what others thought of her. Every spin, every step she took in that small room made her stronger. Her body had started to move with confidence again, and even though she worked long hours, she didn't feel tired. Dance gave her energy and courage. One morning, while setting up the dining area, she overheard a tense conversation between the event manager and the assistant. "I don't know what to do," the manager said, sounding worried. "The main dancer just canceled this morning. She's sick and won't be able to perform at the event. The rich man will lose his mind if we don't find a replacement soon." The assistant replied, "The event is in 3 days. We can't find a new performer that quickly." "What are we going to do?" Rena's hands froze as she arranged the flowers on the table. Her heart started beating faster. The dancer had canceled. This was the same performance she had dreamed about, the one she had been secretly preparing for in her heart. Her mind whispered, "This is your chance." But almost instantly, fear followed that thought. What if they laugh again? What if they say a maid can't dance in front of guests? She tried to push the idea away and focus on her work, but the thought wouldn't leave her. Later that afternoon, as she walked past the ballroom, she stopped and looked inside. The stage was being prepared. Shiny lights, a red curtain, and speakers placed all around. It looked beautiful. She could almost imagine herself standing there under those lights, dancing her heart out. But then she remembered that night, the laughter, the humiliation, the way the rich man had mocked her. The memory made her chest tighten. Maybe it was better to stay quiet. Maybe dreams like that weren't meant for people like her. That evening, she sat alone in her room, staring at the small mirror on the wall. The silence was heavy. Then, without realizing it, tears rolled down her cheeks. She whispered softly, "Why am I scared? What else do I have to lose?" She stood up and played her favorite song. The music filled the tiny room, and she began to move. Every step carried her pain, every spin carried her strength. She danced like she was telling her story. The story of being laughed at, of being invisible, of finding herself again. When the song ended, she took a deep breath and looked at herself in the mirror. "I can do this," she said quietly. "I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing this for me." The next morning, she gathered all her courage and went to speak to the event manager. Her voice was nervous, but her heart was steady. "Sir," she said softly, "I heard the dancer canceled. If you'll allow me, I can perform." The manager looked up at her, confused. "You? You're one of the maids, right?" She nodded. "Yes, but I can dance. I've been practicing." The manager looked at her for a long moment, not sure what to say. He almost laughed, but stopped himself when he saw the determination in her eyes. There was something about her expression. It wasn't pride, it wasn't desperation. It was pure courage. "All right," he finally said. "We'll do a short rehearsal tomorrow, but I can't promise anything. If it's not good enough, we'll have to find someone else." Rena's heart filled with hope. "Thank you," she said with a small smile. That one chance was all she needed. When she walked away, the assistant whispered to the manager, "Are you serious? Letting a maid dance in front of all those people?" The manager shrugged. "Honestly, we have no other choice." And she seems confident. "Let's just see what she can do." The next evening, the rehearsal took place in the empty ballroom. Only the manager, the assistant, and a few workers were there. Rena walked onto the stage wearing a simple white dress she had made from an old uniform. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady. The music began to play, the same song she had practiced every night. At first, her movements were slow, careful, almost shy, but soon her body forgot the fear. Her arms flowed like water, her steps matched every beat perfectly, and her expression told a story. There was pain, strength, and hope all mixed together. The room grew silent. Even the workers who were cleaning stopped to watch. By the time the music ended, everyone just stood there quietly staring at her. The manager finally spoke. "That was unexpected," he said slowly. "You're really good." Rena smiled softly, her eyes shining. "Thank you, sir," he nodded. "All right, you'll perform at the event." The assistant looked shocked. "You're actually letting her do it?" The manager replied firmly, "Yes, she's earned it." When Rena returned to her room that night, she couldn't hold back her tears. But this time they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of joy. For the first time in her life, she had been given a real chance. Over the next few days, she practiced harder than ever. She worked during the day and danced late into the night. Her feet ached, her muscles hurt, but she didn't stop. Each time she looked at her reflection, she reminded herself of why she was doing this. Not to prove others wrong, but to prove herself right. On the day of the event, the mansion buzzed with excitement. The rich man walked around giving orders, making sure everything looked perfect. When he heard that one of his maids was going to dance, he laughed. "A maid performing at my event? This should be entertaining," he said with a smirk. His friends laughed too, just like before, but Rena didn't let their laughter reach her. She stayed in her corner, eyes closed, taking deep breaths. Her heart was beating fast, but her spirit was calm. She thought about her mother's words, "Dance with your heart, not your feet." She smiled softly and whispered, "I will, Mama." As the lights dimmed and the music began, she stepped onto the stage. The crowd looked surprised to see her there. Some guests whispered, others chuckled quietly. But when the first note of the song filled the hall, Rena began to move. Her dance wasn't about showing off. It was about expressing what words couldn't say. Every step spoke of struggle. Every turn carried the pain of being laughed at, and every gesture showed her courage. Her movements were full of emotion, powerful, honest, and real. The audience, who had expected to laugh, slowly grew silent. The music and her movement seemed to pull them into her story. By the time the song ended, there wasn't a sound in the room, just the echo of her final step and the beating of hearts that had been deeply touched. For a few seconds, the hall was completely quiet. Then suddenly applause erupted, loud and genuine. People stood up, clapping, some even with tears in their eyes, and in that moment Rena realized something powerful. She didn't need to prove her worth to anyone. Her dance had already done that for her. She bowed deeply, her eyes glistening. The same hall that once echoed with cruel laughter now roared with applause and admiration. And somewhere at the back of the room, the rich man who had once laughed at her stood frozen, silent, and ashamed. The sound of applause still echoed in the air when Rena slowly raised her head. Her eyes were filled with tears, but this time they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of victory, quiet, powerful, and deeply earned. She had done it. The same hall that once humiliated her now celebrated her. For a moment it felt unreal. She could barely believe this was the same place where she had once stood, trying to hide her tears while people laughed at her. As she stood there, breathing heavily, she looked around. Every face she saw was clapping. The guests, the servants, even the workers who had known her for years. Some had their hands over their hearts. The air was heavy with emotion, as if everyone had witnessed something beyond a dance and something real and unforgettable. The lights dimmed slightly, and Rena stepped off the stage. Her heart was still pounding fast, not from fear anymore, but from joy and relief. She walked behind the curtain and leaned against the wall, trying to steady herself. Her hands trembled, but a soft smile touched her face. She whispered to herself, "I did it." A few moments later, the event manager came running backstage. His face was glowing with excitement. "That was incredible." he said, clapping his hands together. You have no idea what you just did out there. Everyone is talking about you. The whole room felt your performance. Rena blushed slightly, her eyes shining. Thank you, sir, she said softly. I just danced from my heart, the manager nodded. Well, that's exactly what people felt. You didn't just dance, you told a story. Outside, the rich man sat in his chair, completely silent. The guests were still talking about the performance, praising the maid who danced like a star. For the first time in a long while, he didn't know what to say. His usual proud smile was gone. His mind replayed her movements, the grace, the confidence, the strength. It was as if the same person he had once mocked had become someone entirely different. He stood up quietly and walked toward the stage area. When he reached behind the curtain, he saw Rena talking politely with the staff. For a few seconds, he just watched her. She wasn't showing off. She wasn't demanding attention. She looked humble, peaceful, and truly happy. Then he cleared his throat. Everyone turned to look at him. The air suddenly grew quiet. Even Rena froze for a moment when she saw him. The same man who had once laughed at her now stood there, expression serious but softer than before. He walked closer and said slowly, That was beautiful, truly beautiful. Rena didn't know how to respond. She simply nodded slightly, her eyes kind but calm. The man looked down, almost embarrassed. I owe you an apology, he continued. I was wrong about you. I judged you unfairly. There was silence for a moment. Then Rena spoke, her voice gentle but firm. You don't owe me anything, sir. I didn't dance to prove you wrong. I danced to prove myself right. The words hung in the air, simple yet powerful. The rich man nodded slowly, realizing how deeply those words cut through his pride. You have something special, he said softly. Something money can't buy. Rena smiled. Everyone has something special, sir. Sometimes people just need a chance to show it. The manager, standing nearby, clapped his hands lightly. She's right, he said. What she did tonight was more than entertainment. It was courage. Later that evening, when the event ended, people started coming up to Rena to congratulate her. Guests who hadn't even known her name before now spoke to her with admiration. Some of them said her performance made them cry. Others asked if she had ever danced professionally. Rena felt overwhelmed but deeply grateful. She answered each person politely, always with the same humble smile. She didn't brag or act proud. She simply said thank you and expressed how happy she was that they liked her dance. After everyone left, the mansion grew quiet again. The decorations still sparkled under the soft lights, and the air was filled with the faint sound of the night breeze. Rena sat on a chair near the stage, still wearing her simple dance dress. Her feet ached. Her body was tired, but her heart felt light. She thought back to her childhood, the little girl who had once danced barefoot on the streets, dreaming of a stage. That dream had faded for years, buried under work and responsibilities, but somehow life had brought her back to it in the most unexpected way. She smiled softly to herself. Maybe dreams never really die, she whispered. They just wait for the right time to return. As she sat there, the rich man walked in again, this time alone. He looked at her for a moment before saying, Rena, I want to thank you, not just for performing, but for reminding me something important. Rena tilted her head slightly. What's that, sir? He sighed. That respect isn't about status or wealth. It's about heart. I used to think people like you only work to serve, but tonight I saw something greater. You reminded me that talent, grace, and dignity can exist anywhere, even in silence, even in humility. Rena smiled softly. I'm glad you saw that, sir. The man hesitated for a moment, then said, If you ever want to continue dancing, I'll help you. I know people who can train you professionally. You deserve that. Rena was touched by his offer, but shook her head gently. Thank you, sir. That means a lot, but I don't want to leave my work yet. This place, it gave me a chance when no one else did. For now, that's enough for me. The man nodded slowly. You have a kind heart, he said. I respect that. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. And Rena, you're not just a maid anymore. To me, you're an artist. After he left, Rena sat quietly for a while, letting those words sink in. She didn't need fame or wealth. What she had gained that night was something far more meaningful. Self-respect and the realization that her worth was never defined by others. The next morning, when she came to work, the atmosphere in the mansion was completely different. Everyone looked at her with admiration and warmth. The same people who once ignored her now smiled when they saw her. Some even asked her for advice about confidence and courage. She didn't act any different, though. She still did her duties with the same care, still greeted everyone with the same gentle smile. But deep down, something inside her had changed forever. That night, after finishing her chores, she went back to her small room. The mirror still stood in the same place, and the same old phone played her favorite song. She looked at herself, the same person, yet not the same at all. She began to dance again, slowly, softly, just for herself. There were no lights, no crowd, no applause this time. Just her reflection, her heart, and the quiet music filling the air. And in that moment, she realized something beautiful. She didn't need an audience to shine. She didn't need approval to feel worthy. Her happiness came from within, from knowing she had faced her fears and stood tall. Outside, the city lights shimmered in the distance. The night was calm, peaceful, and somewhere in that silence, Rena's story became a quiet lesson. A lesson that life may laugh at you. People may doubt you. But if you hold on to your truth one day, your light will outshine their laughter. She had once been mocked for her weight, for her looks, for her job. But now when people spoke her name, they didn't talk about any of that. They talked about the maid who danced like a star, the woman who reminded everyone that strength doesn't come from power, but from the courage to believe in yourself when no one else does. As she finished her quiet dance and looked into her reflection, she whispered softly, "Thank you for not giving up." The music faded, but the glow in her heart stayed bright. And though she might never stand on a big stage again, she had already found something far greater: peace, dignity, and the confidence that no laughter could ever take away again.